All right, thank you guys so much. We have another edition of my Kill Rationalism series. Today we're going to be discussing why rationality will never be able to bridge the is-ought gap and how it creates the gap as well. Now, the last couple of videos have been fun. They've been a little more artistic. They've been less mental, less intellectual. And don't get me wrong, I love doing those videos, and I think they're important for the series because not everything is intellect. Not everything is mental. Not everything is rational. You have to open yourselves up. And I'm probably going to be doing another fun, artsy music video later. But in this, I don't want to shirk my intellectual responsibilities. So today in this episode, we're going to be going through one of my Substack articles. Um, and it's going to be about bridging the is-ought gap and why rationality cannot do that. So I will leave, of course, a link in the description to my Substack if you guys want to check out my articles. You will see a little more of my political views over there. I do apologize. Again, we are cool if you disagree over here at Idols of the Cave. We are cool. We don't have to agree on everything. That's fine. Just we're cool. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So, this article, of course, is titled Bridging the Is-Ought Gap, and gap is in quotes. Now, my little subtitle here really does explain in a sentence why rationality will never be able to bridge this gap. And that is titled A Mode of Thought That Necessitates the Gap Will Never Bridge It. That's really what this comes down to. Now, we're going to go through it. Now, I don't claim to be a brilliant writer. I don't claim to be some amazing author or have some great diction or anything like that. So that's not really what this is. The point of this video is not to show off how amazing I am at writing, because if I did that, we wouldn't be making this video at all. It's just to get the ideas out there. So don't get lost on grammatical. There's a couple of things I would have changed, but maybe I'll do it later. So let's just get into it. I can't imagine this one's going to be too long. The only other disclaimer is I apologize for repeating myself in this video with topics that have been raised for in other videos in this series, but one, you have to drill it into your head. Two, not everyone started with me from the beginning. As much as I love you guys to death, I really do. I want to get new people in to kind of grow just get people talking about these ideas more than anything. So let's get into the article. I write, the quote is-ought gap, contemporarily called the is-should gap, has plagued ethical debate since its rational inception. On one hand, we have quote unquote is, which describes how the world is without moral judgment or engagement. We are simply describing, not prescribing. The quote unquote should or quote unquote ought is where we provide our prescriptions. We describe how the world should be, not how it is. There is a gap, or more accurately, space between the two ideas and conceptions. Here's another thing. This I did not get from Gebser. He might talk about this later in the book, but I haven't gotten there yet. So I'm expecting a little more pushback on this in the comments. So if you guys, I know I have some of you philosophy guys out there. If you guys disagree, please, I prefer if you be cool about it, but you don't even have to do if you don't want to. Really, it's not about me trying to impose my objectively correct opinion on you. I'm just trying to generate discussion, and then if you guys correct me, great. You know what I mean? That's awesome. So we can see what's happening here. We have the is, we have the ought or the should. So remember, of course, in episode 1, how rationality relates objects in the world to each other. It establishes the two binaries that form the base of the triangle, and then invokes the third aspect of measuring thought to either synthesize or privilege one of the two. So we have 1 is, 2 should, and then the gap is space. And of course, perspectivity or objectified space, birth rational thought. Very classic rational thought. Boom, boom, boom. Let's see. Okay. And so, if I were to read about a murder in Baltimore, any old Tuesday that is, that tells me what happened, what exists or what existed in the world. We're describing a reality. But if I were to show the article to my friend, I might say something like, this is tragic. This is tragic. We should support policies that minimize these murders to the furthest realistic extent. Now we're prescribing a reality. Those who have read my other articles may see where this is going. The positing of an is on one hand and its antithesis, quote, should, on the other, in a dualistic manner no less, is the classic way rationality brings objects in the world into relation with each other. But not just that. The idea of the quote unquote gap inherent in the concept clearly ascribes a spatialized aspect or character to the idea. Rationality was born from the discovery of perspective, the ability to render 3D objects or images on 2D flat surfaces. That is, it was born from the discovery of objectified space, and we concede said spatialization in the idea of a quote-unquote gap space between the antithetical concepts. And like other dualistic binaries posited by rational thought, be it nature or culture, theism or atheism, political left or right, man or woman, the individual or the collective, true or false, or rationality or irrationality, the binaries must be reconciled. But so far, philosophers have struggled to overcome this simple challenge. We're not reinventing the wheel or discovering string theory here, but this one simple problem, has stumped some of the greatest minds Western civilization has to offer. Each attempted reconciliation has been deconstructed and thrown into the trash pit where all the other bad philosophical ideas rot. Only Alasdair MacIntyre has been somewhat successful in his attempt. So this very simple problem has yet to be satisfactorily reconciled or resolved. And the reason why is because a certain mode of thought created the problem, but is inadequate or impotent in solving the problem. Very simple. And then this is my basic understanding of Alasdair MacIntyre's idea. Again, philosophy guys, if I have this wrong, I mean this sincerely. Please correct me. I don't claim to be some genius. I really don't. So here's my idea here's his idea according to my basic understanding. Let's take a farmer. When one thinks of a farmer, what do they think of? Usually, they envision a man or woman tending the field, harvesting crops, and raising livestock. They manage the barrels of hay and spread their fertilizer. In short, when picturing a farmer, what quote unquote is, you are picturing what a farmer does. So this is to say a farmer is what a farmer should do. If you want to be a farmer, what should you do? Do things that make you a farmer, that sort of personify, if you will, or exemplify the essence of what it is to be a farmer. So is and should are inherently linked. A farmer is what a farmer does, that is what a farmer should do, farming activities. And how do we know they're farming activities? Because that is the essence of a farmer. It's not really contradictory, there's almost a polar complementarity there. And so we have rationally reconciled the two. A farmer is what a farmer does. If a farmer were to clean my teeth, he would no longer be a farmer, but a dentist. We can use whatever words we want to describe or label these distinct professions, but the distinction remains. That's for all you postmodernists out there. Simply redefining or changing the signifier doesn't really change the signified. I'm focusing on the signified, not the signifier. Very simple. Thomas Sowell taught me that, and it's helped me just cut through the postmodernists very clearly. But as neat as this is, it doesn't help us much with our little Baltimore example mentioned earlier. A murderer is what a murderer does. Okay, and? There's nothing in MacIntyre's idea that would allow us to effectively persuade the murderer not to murder, at least my understanding of MacIntyre's idea right here. Maybe he has something in his books that would prevent me from making a paragraph like this. There's nothing in MacIntyre's idea that would allow us to effectively persuade the murderer not to murder, only clarify our ontological categorization of him. If we know that a man is a murderer, the question of what we should say or do to convince him to stop murdering arises. We're back to where we started. So how do we bridge this gap? You don't, at least not rationally. The gap is never bridged, only dissolved. And the reason for this is that rationality is inherently incapable of bridging such a quote-unquote gap because it relies on the gap to function in the first place. The distinction between subject and object, knower and known, is a particular stance or way of bringing objects in the world into relation with each other. Rationality operates by drawing this distinction, by imposing space between the separate parts or conceptions. That's why Gebser says thought is a spatializing act. Rational thought posits something quantifiably measurable and consciously known. Okay, do I want to... We'll skip this one. I just go into the triangle. If you follow this series, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you don't, actually, screw it. We'll just speed through it real quick. Rational thought posits something quantifiably measurable and consciously known against something else that is quantifiably measurable and consciously known, usually but not always its antithesis, in a dualistic manner, meaning the meaning is conferred by how the binaries differ rather than how they are alike, and then invokes the third aspect of measuring thought that measures, calculates, analyzes to make a directed judgment, usually either privileging one of the binaries or creating a synthesis. The binaries operate as the triangle's base, whereas the third aspect, the directed judgment, forms the top. This triangular thought has been used frequently by Aristotle, Plato, Einstein, Bohr, Kant, Hegel, and many others. And we can see how this pattern mirrors the conception of the is-ought gap. One is not the other, and space exists between the two that must be bridged to confer synthetic unity. So there you go, very classic rational thought there. All we need now is the third act of measuring thought to rationally reconcile the two and render a definitive judgment. But, as mentioned earlier, this has proven rather difficult thus far. But why? The reason is that two separate consciousness structures, strata of the collective unconscious that ultimately represent a particular way of bringing objects in the world into relation with each other, are being deployed. But only one is seen as the sole creator and educator of the issue. When we talk about what quote unquote is, we're in the realm of the quantifiably measurable and consciously known. We can know exactly who was murdered, who did the murdering, what street the murder took place, what the victim and killer were wearing, what time of day it happened, and whatever else we can reasonably think of. We take the whole of the situation and divide it into its component parts, offering us a greater clarity of understanding in the process. As such, we are deploying rational thought, or more accurately, the mental consciousness structure. Logic is a tool of rationality, an arm of it, that only works when it can deduce a particular from a general. And that's what we've done in the preceding paragraph. Let's take another example. So in the preceding paragraph, we have the general. Someone was murdered. We all agree on that. Why do we agree on that? Because I went out on the street one day and I saw a poor woman with 3 holes in her head like a damn bowling ball, and I know she's dead. So what we've done is we've taken the general that we all agreed on and we're reducing particulars, which is what I mentioned, the weapon that was used, what they were wearing, what time of day, all that stuff. Let's take another example. Socrates is a man. Men are mortal. Socrates is mortal. Makes sense, right? The key here is that the premises, in actuality, rationality's version of perspective's vanishing point, are generally agreeable, axiomatic. We know Socrates is a human, and there has never been a human on Earth who has not died or will not die, especially back then. I say that now because the transhumanists are trying to change that, but they can only do that based on technological advances that simply weren't around back then. And so we arrive at the rationally correct conclusion. Socrates is mortal. What happens if we use logic for induction rather than deduction? We get this. A man drowned in the river. We are all men. We will all drown in a river. When we use logic for induction, we run into problems as it struggles to make the shift from particular to general. In its efficient use being directed from the general to the particular, logic and rational thinking mirror perspectival sight, which does the same thing. Whatever is encompassed in your visual sector is not the entire world, but a narrowed down sector of it, which in turn is afforded more clarity. And so we can see why philosophers have struggled to bridge this quote-unquote gap. They use logic to objectively deduce one quote-unquote is, an area where it thrives, but deploy the same logic in an area where it isn't suited, the inductive character of should, or inductive domain of should. But perhaps logic struggles in the domain of should because but perhaps logic struggles in the domain of quote unquote should because when we think of what we ought to do or should of our moral contents, we are gesturing at something quantifiably immeasurable. We know the effects of our moral contents, but not their causes or tangible essence. They're immeasurable but powerful because they're immeasurable. And so we have another symmetry in addition to the one posited about deduction and induction, the quantifiably measurable and the quantifiably immeasurable. Seeing as rationality is confined to the former, it is no surprise that it yields effective results exclusively in the domain of is. The problem arises when rationalists insist on using it exclusively to determine what we should do. But because rationality will never be able to do so due to its inherent limitations, it seems the gap will exist undaunted. So there's two symmetries. So in the is, we have deduction and quantifiably measurable and consciously known. That's rational thought where it thrives, as I laid out with the Socrates example. So, and the fact that rationality, as I made clear, relies on the quantifiably measurable and consciously known. Both of those prerequisites are tripped in the deduction of is. We use rationality to determine what is. The problem is when we get to should, there's an asymmetry. Now, just like there was quantifiably measurable, now it's quantifiably immeasurable. Just like it was general to a particular, now we're going from particular to a general in the domain of should. So there's an asymmetry here, and this is why I think people struggle to bridge this gap, this artificially imposed gap. But there is an even further problem, one that is self-defeating. The truly insurmountable obstacle imposed on those who endeavor to bridge the gap is that, by attempting to bridge it, one is presupposing its existence, and the inherently divisive nature of rationality, which depends on the subject-object distinction, will never be able to adequately reconcile the two. Again, Rationality is a particular way of bringing objects in the world into relation with each other. It operates by positing the either-or dualistic binaries. There must be space between the ideas, concepts, and objects under consideration. But there are other ways of bringing objects in the world into relation with each other, and if rationality is proven to be, at best, ineffective in this domain of life or consideration, we should instead deploy a more effective mode of thought. Using rationality to bridge the is-ought gap is like trying to bite your teeth. A mode of thought that requires the gap will be useless in bridging it. The real way to bridge the gap is by recognizing the distinction, the gap between is and should, created by rational thought as an artificial construct, a projection made by us humans. Retract the projection and see through it, allowing you to comprehend the integral nature of our world, being and action, knowledge and responsibility, is and should, all integrally interwoven, not statically and dualistically separated. Values are not derived from fact. This should not come the should, does not come from what is, but is present within what is. The quote unquote problem is a problem only if one creates it as such. You are free to do that, but don't complain when you find the bridge you've been building has collapsed. Then you'll know the true emptiness of space, the real nature of the quote unquote gap. Thank you for reading. So that's my thought. So essentially, the way you transcend this gap is by achieving integral consciousness, recognizing the static. I can never pronounce this correctly. Syneratic. We'll be getting into this in my Gebser series. Don't worry, you guys are kind of lost on this, and so am I to an extent. I'm still learning about this stuff. But retract the projection, see through it, and achieve the integral consciousness and the impartment of truth. This is Gebser's words, not mine. Sounds a little spiritual, but hey, it's better than this. So let me know if you guys disagree, please. Like I said, if you guys are interested in my other articles, I will leave in a link in the description of this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. For all you philosophy guys, if you guys think I went wrong, please let me know in the comments. I really am interested. I think it'll generate an interesting discussion. And I hope you guys are thriving. You guys are the best. I have a lot of big changes in my life coming up soon. So I'm going to try my best to feed the streets, feed you guys. But also, I also have to keep priorities in line too. So there might be a slight slowdown in videos coming, but I'm going to try my best not to. So I love you guys. Let me know what you guys think, and I will see you guys soon. Thank you.